Eric Trump is expected to testify later today in the New York civil fraud trial against his father, the Trump family, and their company. He is the second family member to be called to the stand. His older brother, Donald Trump Jr., who is a co-defendant in the case, testified yesterday. So Robert Costa has been following all of this for us, and he is joining us now. All right, Robert, so I guess let's start with Don Jr.'s testimony yesterday. When I was reading some of the descriptions of what it was like in the courtroom, it seemed quite different than what it was like when his father has been in the courtroom. I mean, some of the articles almost described it as kind of jovial.
Former President Donald Trump's eldest son, Donald Trump Jr., did testify yesterday in the New York courtroom as this ongoing civil lawsuit continues. And what's interesting about his testimony yesterday is he defended his family's business practices as they face a possible $250 million fine and the potential end of their ability to do business in New York. He was, as you said, sometimes jovial even in the courtroom, but it was pretty serious in terms of what he was being asked. Did his family in any way participate in a fraudulent scheme to inflate the numbers of Trump properties? Trump Jr. repeatedly said under oath that his family was involved with some of the financing, but at the end of the day, he said again and again, they relied on experts outside of the Trump organization to come up with those numbers.
I want to remind people that this trial is a little different than other trials. The core accusation that they artificially inflated or deflated the value of property and other assets, that's already been established. So now they're in court now. There is no jury. It's only a judge. Can you just explain to people what's being established now if the core accusation is a foregone conclusion?
That's an excellent point. It's already been established by Judge Engoron in this case that there will be a penalty. The question now is, what will the scope of that penalty be? Will it be $250 million? And will they be able to do business in any way in the state of New York? Of course, the Trump organization and the various defendants could appeal this down the line. But at this point, they're facing a reckoning of a family business that goes back decades. Think about Fred Trump building real estate properties back in the 1950s and 60s as Donald Trump was coming up the ranks in the outer boroughs of New York. Now all of that in the hot spotlight of this New York courtroom. Former President Donald Trump is expected to testify there next week and to talk about how he came up with his own valuations, I'm told, over the years, how he relied on outside experts, but he himself valued his brand in such a way that he believes he was doing something that was accurate based on his assessment of his brand, even if an outside accounting firm did not always echo his statement.
Mm-hmm. And so we heard from Don Jr., and, you know, part of his testimony was essentially, hey, I wasn't really responsible for that part of the business, the day-to-day nitty-gritty, that wasn't me. But Eric Trump is going to be testifying. And, I mean, the impression that I got, particularly while Donald Trump was president, while he was campaigning, is that, yes, he was leaving sort of the businesses to his children to run. Don Jr., though, was out there a lot campaigning, and you got the sense that Eric was the one that was really going to be babysitting the businesses. So what do we expect to hear from Eric's testimony?
That is correct. Eric Trump is someone who has been intimately involved with the Trump family finances for years. I have sat in the courtroom in New York as different witnesses have come to the stand and talked about how Eric Trump signed document after document attesting to the accuracy of different valuations for property. So Eric Trump has a different role inside of the Trump organization. Donald Trump Jr., especially during Trump's presidency, ran the former president's trust, also served as an executive. Ivanka Trump, the daughter of the former president, is expected to testify sometime next week up in New York. Eric Trump, however, is not the central figure in the financing of the Trump organization. It has often been Alan Weisselberg, who has faced enormous legal hurdles in recent years, including an indictment, jail time, and you can expect so many of the Trump family members, as former Trump executives have already testified, that it was Weisselberg driving the train when it came to the finances, when it came to dealing with the outside firms. So what this all comes down to is responsibility. And they're making a case through testimony to the judge that it was the outside firms, Mazars, that has the responsibility for getting things right, not the executives inside of the company. We'll see if that holds water with Judge Engoron, whom the former president continues to attack relentlessly on social media.
Yes, he does. Bob, thank you very much.
Thank you.